recognition of higher states of consciousness is a recurring theme that is evident in all cultures throughout history. What is the basis of our conscious experience, the cycle of waking, dreaming, and sleeping? The simplest state of awareness is a self-referral state. It is a field of all possibilities. As the physicist Eddington said, the stuff of the world is mind stuff. The ancient Yoga Vasishta likewise teaches that this world appears material, but is ultimately pure consciousness. These profound insights infer that consciousness is all there is, and we are not in the world. The world is within us. Welcome to Simplest State, where we examine these understandings and explore the very nature of consciousness and self-realization. Welcome everyone. Today's topic on Simplest State is the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita, without any commentary, is a slim volume of 18 chapters and 700 short verses. The entire book can be read in a single setting. But this short text has gained worldwide reverence, and it addresses the universal themes of duty, righteousness, and the very nature of reality. The Bhagavad Gita has influenced countless philosophers, writers, and spiritual leaders around the world. The Gita has served to bring understanding between religions because its themes transcend specific boundaries and foster a sense of unity in the world. It is relevant to people of all backgrounds and inspires individuals to pursue righteousness in their personal and professional lives. It serves as a bridge connecting Eastern and Western thought, and notable Western thinkers influenced by the Bhagavad Gita include Ralph Waldo Emerson, T.S. Eliot, Henry David Thoreau, Aldous Huxley, Joseph Campbell, Martin Luther King, Carl Jung, and Leo Tolstoy. In an increasingly complex world, the Gita offers insights into understanding one's purpose and navigating challenges, making it a valuable resource for everyone. Its teachings encourage personal reflection, ethical responsibility, and a deeper understanding of life's complexities, preparing individuals to contribute positively to the world. The Bhagavad Gita has been translated into over 80 languages, making it one of the most widely translated texts in the world. This extensive translation effort reflects its global significance and the interest it has garnered across various cultures and communities. In the preface to his commentary, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi wrote, "The Bhagavad Gita is the light of life, lit by God at the altar of man, to save humanity from the darkness of ignorance and suffering." Our guest today is Dr. William Sands, a distinguished academic and researcher affiliated with Maharishi International University. He holds a PhD and is recognized for his contributions to the fields of consciousness, education, and health. Dr. Sands focuses on the relationship between consciousness and personal development, and his work explores how higher states of consciousness can influence well-being and creativity. Dr. Sands has published various papers and articles contributing to the academic discourse surrounding consciousness and its practical applications. His research often emphasizes the integration of Eastern philosophies with contemporary scientific understanding. His work aligns with the notion that an understanding of consciousness can lead to profound personal transformation and societal progress. He is a Sanskrit scholar and has lectured in over 30 countries, has published 5 books, and we are very fortunate to have him with us today to discuss the Bhagavad Gita. Welcome to you, Dr. Sands.
Thank you very much, Ron. It's a great pleasure to be here, and also an extremely great pleasure to discuss Bhagavad Gita. You know, as you said, it's an enormously read and translated work that's been all over the world in so many different contexts, and it's always a delight to talk about it and think about it and ponder the wisdom of the different verses.
Let's start actually then by setting the stage of the Bhagavad Gita, because not all listeners or viewers may be familiar with it. The term Bhagavad Gita, the Sanskrit, is often translated as Song of God or Divine Song, because it depicts the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, with all the armies of the whole world drawn up on one side or the other. Now, can you please fill us in a bit more on the scene and the significance of this setting in which the Bhagavad Gita takes place?
Yeah, it's part of one of the great epics of the world and one of the great epics of India called Mahabharata. And Mahabharata means basically Great India. And it's a long, I can't remember how many thousands of verses it is, but it depicts the rivalry and the infighting between two families, related families. They're basically cousins, and the contention is over who is going to be the ruler of the kingdom. And they tried everything they could do to resolve it, but ultimately it came down to this enormous battle that Ram was just mentioning, where two armies, one representing the forces of righteousness and the other the forces of evil, confront each other on the field of Kurukshetra, which is in central India, somewhere in the vague vicinity of New Delhi, India. And at the outset, the hero of the Mahabharata, his name was Arjuna, the greatest warrior of the time, he asked his charioteer to take him out in between the two armies. He wanted to look at them, he wanted to think about it, and he was driven out by Krishna, and he looked at the armies and he saw that in the opposing army there were family members, friends, people he loved dearly, but it was the army of evil, and in his own it was more family and many great warriors of different sorts, and it confused him a little bit. He became confused, might not be the right word, but he became unsure of what he should do. How should he behave? He was there to fight, but he didn't want to kill his family members. He didn't want to kill his teachers. He didn't want to kill some of the great wise people that happened to be on the side of evil. And yet he felt obligated to uphold the side of righteousness, to uphold the army of the Pandavas. And so he was confused. He sat down in the chariot, he threw down his bow and arrow, and he turned to his charioteer, who was Lord Krishna. And Krishna traditionally represents and embodies the totality of life, the totality of natural law, the ultimate reality of life. So he was a very good person to take advice from. And Arjuna looked to him and said, basically, essentially, what shall I do? If I fight, I'll kill members of my family. If I don't fight, then I will not be upholding the kingdom in the way that my dharma, my duty, requires me to do. So he complained a bit to Lord Krishna in a very, very intelligent way. He outlined the different pluses and the minuses. And Lord Krishna gave him his advice over 700 different verses, and that constitutes the Bhagavad Gita. And Lord Krishna, at first, he told him, his first advice was, do your duty, do that which you are born to do, and that way you can incur no sin. And then later he outlined the whole philosophy of yoga and also the philosophy of Vedanta. Bhagavad Gita belongs in two different branches of the Vedic knowledge, of the Vedic literature. One is Vedanta, which explores the ultimate reality of life, and one is the field of yoga. And the field of yoga is an area that's, you could say, grossly misunderstood in the modern world. When you look at the term yoga, most people think of practices, different practices for developing enlightenment. There can be asanas, the yoga postures, breathing exercises, meditations are included in the practices of yoga, purification techniques, all kinds of different things are associated with yoga. So throughout the Bhagavad Gita, the term yoga appears. This verse, that verse, all throughout it, the 700 verses, we see the term yoga. And invariably, translators and commentators have interpreted that as the practice of yoga. There are varying practices, different practices. There are 4 fundamental types of yoga that have been outlined in the Vedic literature. And that's how it's translated, and that's how the commentaries run. But Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and I want to kind of emphasize his perspective most because I'm associated with his university, and that's the area of knowledge that I'm trained in. Maharishi took a very, very unique understanding, and he said that yoga can refer to practices just as it's done, but fundamentally it refers to the state of yoga, different from the practice. And the state of yoga, derived from the Sanskrit term yoga, means unity. And it refers to different values of unity, one of which we experienced during the Transcendental meditation technique that Maharishi has taught to the world. It also refers to the yoga of higher states of consciousness and so forth. And in many cases throughout the Bhagavad Gita, where yoga has been interpreted as a practice, Maharishi has taken the view that yoga refers to the state of yoga, the state of unity. And in many cases, it's the transcendental state of yoga that we experience during transcendental consciousness. When we practice the transcendental meditation technique, it's a very simple, natural, effortless technique that we practice twice a day for 20 minutes. And what happens is that one begins to experience during the practice subtler and subtler levels of the mind, and ultimately transcends the thinking process and experiences what is called in yoga philosophy the state of samadhi. It's also referred to as a state of pure consciousness or pure awareness or pure existence. And it's the source of our thinking, the source of our intellectual activity, the source of our any kind of mental activity. And so when we transcend it, we're essentially going beyond our own individuality and experiencing the state of yoga. So in the Bhagavad Gita, there are many different verses throughout where it describes, or the verse describes in Krishna's words, what the state of yoga is. That it's this fundamental level of creation. It's the fundamental level of human individuality. It's the source of the stable value of the intellect and all of these different qualities. But translators and commentators have interpreted that those verses as a reference to the practice of yoga. And this creates an entirely different understanding. And I'll give you an example. This is one of the verses that Maharishi has highlighted through his commentary. He spent many pages talking about it. And one of Lord Krishna's advices to Arjuna was, the Sanskrit is Nistray Gunyo Bhava. And it means be without the 3 gunas. Now, what does that mean? 3 gunas refers to the most fundamental level of nature's functioning, the very finest level of creation. And what translators and commentators have said is that going beyond the 3 gunas means taking an attitude or a mood or a concept of non-attachment. In other words, You walk around during the day and you say, I am not the world around me. I'm not concerned with my family, my business, or whatever else I'm engaged in. I am nothing but that which is beyond the three gunas. And it's basically, a function of creating an attitude. But an attitude doesn't get you to the transcendental state. An attitude keeps you on the surface of the mind. It creates activity in the mind. But what, in Maharishi's view, this is referring to is literally taking the awareness to subtler and subtler states of the mind and transcending the mind completely and experiencing the inner self. It's called Atma frequently in the Sanskrit language, and it's the inner self that is the basis and the source of our creativity, our intelligence, all of that. And that is the state of yoga. It's also called the state of samadhi. They're just different names that describe it in a different way, but it's the same thing. So Lord Krishna's main advice was take your awareness to the transcendent. Now, what good does that do him? He's in a battle situation or he's moving through life. What is the significance of taking your awareness to the transcendent? And the significance is that when one meditates, let's say twice a day for 20 minutes, as we're usually instructed, then one practices TM, one goes deep within, one experiences the state of yoga, and then one takes the awareness out and goes about your daily business. You're not adopting an attitude, you're not adopting a frame of reference or a mood or anything like that. You just experience this state, and then you go walking around and performing whatever activities you like to perform. And that practice of going in and then coming out and going in and coming out enables the quality of yoga to become increasingly lively in your life. So that if that field of yoga is described as of maximum intelligence, creativity, peace, bliss, there are many, many different characteristics that are attributed to it. And when you come out of meditation, you bring some of that with you every day, every month, every year. And ultimately, you experience the state that Maharishi calls cosmic consciousness, which is a state where that unbounded awareness, that infinite creativity, that infinite intelligence is lived in your life permanently. It's always there. You never lose it. And that is also a state of yoga. And that state is also described in the verses of the Bhagavad Gita. So right from the start, we can see that just by the simple understanding that yoga doesn't always refer to a practice, but it refers to the inner self, the inner state of yoga, and it refers to higher states of consciousness, which are described in great detail throughout the text of the Bhagavad Gita. And that was his first advice to Arjuna. Don't worry about all the comings and goings of your life. Transcend. That's the primary thing to do in life. And that alone prepares you to go about and do what you need to do in life.
I want to rewind just a little bit, because at the beginning, you touched briefly upon the difference between the state of steady intellect versus the mood of going around, I am detached, I am aloof. And I'd like to elaborate on that a little bit more, because I think it's a foundational point. And in the Gita, for example, verse 15 in chapter 2, the Gita says, that man indeed whom these contacts with the senses do not disturb, who is even-minded in pleasure and pain, steadfast, he is fit for immortality, O best of men. And I know that for many, that's interpreted as you said, a type of mood. I am aloof, I am not affected by this, I am beyond that. But it's very important, I think, and I'd like you, if possible, to please elaborate more on the difference between the spontaneous equanimity of realization versus the mood of equanimity. And Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, again, in his preface, he comments on this, he cautions about it, saying that the state of reality, as described by the enlightened, cannot become a path for the seeker any more than the description of a destination can replace the road that leads to it. So putting those things together, I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit more for us.
Sure. I think you described it perfectly right there, but I'll give it a try. I mean, it's something that is so fundamental, not just to the understanding of the Bhagavad Gita, but the whole civilization and society of India, because the interpretations that suggest creating a mood or an idea or an attitude have proliferated for many, many thousands of years. And it hasn't brought the result of higher states of consciousness. It hasn't brought the people who practice it, very good, very sincere people who aspire to the realization of the ultimate reality of life. It hasn't brought them there. It just hasn't done the job because it doesn't allow for the contact with the inner self, inner being, the inner state of yoga. And that alone can bring you to higher states of consciousness. In order to grow towards cosmic consciousness and the refined values of higher states of consciousness that lie even beyond cosmic consciousness, in order to grow to those, you must experience the inner self. You must experience the field of yoga within, and then systematically bringing it out. But bringing it out, and this is such an important point, you don't do it by creating a mood or an attitude. You do it just by transcending and then living your life. Very spontaneously, very automatically. You don't have to think about it. There are millions of people in the world today that are practicing transcendental meditation, and they work and live on every level of life. And they just meditate and act, and they go through their day, and they're growing in higher states of consciousness. Even if they learn TM to get better sleep at night, they'll get the better sleep at night, but they're also growing in their own consciousness. And so it's such an extremely important point. And it leads into the second verse that Maharishi liked to emphasize, that is really the next step. The first step is be without the three gunas, experience the state of yoga. And then the second one is, the Sanskrit is yogastha kuru karmani, which means established in yoga, perform action. Now, the translations and commentaries on this verse suggest that recommends to us all that we should become established in our practice, that every day we should do what the practices of yoga, whatever different philosophies outline. Sometimes it means just doing good work. Sometimes it means doing lots of yoga postures and that kind of thing. But in this verse again, the yogastha means established in yoga, and yoga refers not to the activities or the practices, but to the transcendental field that lies within us. So what it is saying is that if Arjuna practices the technique, he goes beyond the three gunas every day, twice a day, then over time and to a growing degree, he will become established in that state, meaning that his awareness is permanently and eternally grounded in the transcendental field of yoga. That he is
spontaneously, too.
Spontaneously, without thinking about it. Thank you for saying that. So very important. And by the way, just as a clarification, because it comes up many times, in classes and lectures and stuff, when Maharishi says he, it refers to he and she. That when Maharishi spoke and when he commented, the common language at the time was that he referred to mankind, basically, referred to he and she. Today, we distinguish it and emphasize that it's he or she establishes his or her awareness in yoga and then performs action. It's an important point to always remember.
Good
Uh,
point. Good
a-
point.
and that's the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. That's the seed. And all of the beautiful teachings that come out of it are based upon that simple understanding. Let me just interject one quick thing. I wrote a paper a number of years ago that was published, um, and it goes through and compares the commentaries of Maharshis to three very famous commentaries, one modern and two ancient, and shows the distinction between Maharishi's commentary and these others. And pretty much it could be summarized just in terms of this misunderstanding of path and goal. That when yoga is mentioned or when higher states of consciousness are mentioned throughout the Gita, it's not referring to a path, something that you do. It's referring to the goal, something that you become.
So you've spoken about two fundamental elements in the commentary. One is nistre gunyo bhavarjun, be without the three gunas, meaning be beyond the relative aspects of life. And yoga sta kuru karmani, established in yourself, in that being. From there, perform action. And again, established in yoga as a sense of being, not as a practice. Now, in chapter 2, the Gita goes on to say, he whom all desires enter, as waters enter the ever full and unmoved sea, attains peace, and not he who cherishes desires. When a man acts without longing, having relinquished all desires, free from the sense of I and mine, he attains to peace. Now I wonder, Bill, if you could please elaborate on this, because I think this verse, again, like many others, is often misinterpreted to mean you should be without desires. You shouldn't have desires. But desires are necessary in life. And isn't, in fact, this verse, again, more about the state of the goal, where the individual is at peace, ever full and unmoved, as Krishna said, like the sea. Desires come and go, but they don't touch him because he's established in yoga, established in self.
Yeah, you said it perfectly. This is a classic example of the confusion between path and goal. And reading that verse of the Bhagavad Gita, and if you read commentaries, I guarantee if you pick up any commentary other than Maharishi's, they will explain how one must rid oneself of desires, that you should just not have desires. You should just, maintain an attitude of, I'm beyond desires and all of that. And Lord Krishna was not describing a path. He was not describing a practice. He was not describing an attitude. He was describing the state of life in which one has become permanently established in yoga, in which one experiences cosmic consciousness. And that is a state of yoga. It is a state of yoga. So when the Bhagavad Gita is called the text of yoga, it's not just about practice. It's about the description of all of these different states. And in that state, one experiences the fulfillment of all desires. One experiences perfect happiness, perfect satisfaction. All of the deep desires that one has, maybe, always wanting a beautiful car, or always wanting, to take a vacation in the Swiss Alps. There's nothing wrong with those desires. If you want to have a nice car, have a nice car, no problem. But they don't grip the mind anymore. Now, that refers primarily to the deep desires. An enlightened person could certainly have superficial desires. I'd really like to have ice cream tonight, or I'd really like to take a walk in the beautiful Alps. No problem with that. Doesn't mean that one is living a completely desireless state, but those deep desires that grip the mind and grip the awareness and that control our lives to some extent, it's those desires that one has gone beyond, not by trying to push them away, but by establishing the awareness in the infinite bliss, infinite peace of the state of yoga, of the state of transcendental consciousness. And then the desires, they just don't touch you, because you know how it is when you're really happy about something, you're feeling really good and really peaceful, and then somebody might, say something that's not so pleasant, and you smile within and just, I don't care about that, and in the experience of enlightenment, the troubles of life, the strong desires, all that kind of thing, they just don't touch. You might react to them. Somebody says something, and you have a nice conversation and correct some misunderstanding. That's okay, but they don't grip you, and they don't upset you, and they don't hurt you.
This is an important topic, and I'd like to go on this a little bit more, because this whole misconception of desires and their role and their effect on us is something that I think really needs clarification. And there is a verse in the Gita where Krishna says, verse 57, chapter 2, he says, "He who has no undue fondness towards anything, who neither exults nor recoils on gaining what is good or bad, his intellect is established." Now again, he talks about established intellect, but it's not a practice. It's not, oh, I don't care about this or don't care about that. It's the reality of the higher state of consciousness. And I think people get confused and think of it as being dispassionate or cold-hearted, but it's not that at all. And if you could perhaps speak more to that, Bill, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. First of all, the intellect, it's that aspect of our personality that decides, it distinguishes. So the example Maharishi used to give many times is, if you walk into a flower store and you think, I want to buy a flower, that's the mind at work. The mind is what thinks, what organizes. But then the intellect kicks in and you think, do I want a daffodil? Do I want a tulip? Do I want a dahlia? That's the intellect beginning to discriminate. And we have that individual intellect in our lives. But in this verse, Krishna talked about the intellect being established in the state of yoga, essentially. Not in the practice, but in the state of yoga. And in that state, then the intellect begins to function on the level of, you could say, cosmic intellect. It's no longer my tiny little intellect, my tiny little limited intellect, but all of a sudden it is that characteristic or quality of intellect that is infinite, unbounded. It's an aspect or a quality of the state of yoga. So when one establishes the awareness in that, through regular experience of transcendental consciousness, then the intellect begins to function in such a way that the deciding and the distinguishing and all of that takes place on a level that is in complete accord with all of the laws of nature. And this brings up one kind of interesting point, is we talk about, this is to backtrack just a bit, but we talk about the state of yoga. Maharishi often describes it as being or pure consciousness or the unified field as the source of creation. And what this means is that all of the laws of nature that create the universe and that guide and administer it, they're all found within this field of pure intelligence, pure being, the state of yoga. So when one establishes the awareness on that level, on the level of enlightenment, on the level of yoga, then one not only has access to these impulses of intelligence, these laws of nature, but they are actually impulses of one's own. This is a little abstract, I know, but it's fun to think about. Those impulses are found to be impulses of one's own awareness. So that when one thinks and decides and plans and all of that, it's not just the little individuality of our lives, but that individuality has become the ocean of consciousness. And so all those laws of nature that guide the intellect, guide the mind, and so forth, they become the cosmic value of those impulses. Just to use a quick analogy, because we're getting into some abstract territory. If you think of this field of pure consciousness or yoga, the state of yoga, as an infinite, unbounded ocean of pure wakefulness, pure consciousness, pure intelligence, and then the ocean rises up into waves, and these waves, in this analogy, represent all of us, the world around us, the galaxies, the trees and flowers and everything. Our individuality is like a wave on the ocean of consciousness. Now, what happens when that wave settles down? We know that waves rise up and we know that they settle down. Again, getting back to what is being compared here, we rise up as an impulse, you could say, of the ocean of being. But what about when that wave settles down? What happens is it doesn't disappear. It becomes the entire ocean. So in terms of our discussion about transcending and experiencing the state of yoga and then having that state of yoga come up into our lives, what it means in this analogy is that we experience the unbounded, infinite source of our own intelligence, and over time, we become that infinite intelligence because it is ourself. It is the most fundamental level of our own awareness, of our own consciousness. So that is one aspect of what's being described here in terms of the intellect becoming established. The intellect is like a tiny wave, settles down, and becomes the entire ocean.
And that's what Krishna means when he talks about steady intellect. He doesn't mean concentrating, staring at a candle. He doesn't mean steady in that sense. He means an intellect that is established in the self, correct?
Yeah, and that's a really, really important point. I'm glad you brought it up, because many practices today have arisen because of qualities described in the Bhagavad Gita that are qualities of the state of yoga. Steadiness is one. You'll read throughout the Bhagavad Gita, it's the state of infinite peace, the state of infinite stability. And so it's often thought, well, if I stare at a candle or if I concentrate on something or, something like that, then I'll gain that state of steadiness. But it doesn't work that way. You can't get to the state of silence by creating more activity in your awareness. It's just a description of the state, not of the path. There's another one that's very famous in the world today, and that is mindfulness, keeping your awareness in the present. And there are seminars that describe how you should maintain yourself always in the present. Don't think of the past, don't think of the future, don't think of anything like that. Just be mindful, stay in the moment. And that is a characteristic of higher states of consciousness. But it's not the path to get there. Walking around and thinking, I am mindful, I'm only in the present. And then you happen to think of the past or you happen to think of the future and you try to drag your mind back. Say, no, that's bad. I should be mindful. I should be always in the present. That's a confusion of the path and the goal. The description of higher states of consciousness fit very well the description of mindfulness. And these misunderstandings came about, again, from very good people who didn't have recourse, who had lost their traditions, had lost the knowledge and understanding of how to transcend, and so took all of the descriptions of the Vedic literature as a practice of yoga or a practice of this or that.
Now, a favorite verse of mine is verse 59. The objects of sense turn away from him who does not feed upon them, but the taste for them persists. And on seeing the Supreme, even this taste ceases. The turbulent senses, O son of Kunti, which is Arjuna, forcibly carry away the mind even of a discerning man who endeavors to control them. Favorite of mine because it's very relatable for me. And I wonder if you can elaborate, again, more on this aspect of the senses, control of the senses, and how the senses will tend to carry away even the discerning.
Yeah, it's a wonderful point, and I think we can all relate to it, and we can see how, that could be misinterpreted and misunderstood as being a direction that we should take in our life. We should again renounce desires and all of that. The thing is desires come from deep impressions. They come from deep impressions in the mind and body that have arisen from previous actions. And so we may not know why we have a particular desire. We may not know why we have, maybe a desire for something that's not completely supportive to our lives, or it may be a desire that's totally supportive, but it comes from the deep impressions that are within us. They're within the physiology. They permeate the physiology. And so in order to, I guess the thought is that in order to get rid of those desires, then we go to fulfill them. But fulfilling the desires doesn't usually take care of it. What takes care of it is deep rest to the physiology. And when we practice transcendental meditation as a technique for going deep within, the mind settles down to a state of peace, and the body does as well. And when the body settles down, it is capable of purifying itself, removing stress, removing imbalance, removing whatever it is that inhibits the physiology from experiencing the state of our full potential. And it does so within the rest. And in that, note that the seed of so many desires and so many thoughts and so many impressions gets, you could say, eradicated. Maybe when you were a child, you had some fight with your best friend, and it created some stress in the nervous system. And when that stress comes out, it may or may not have anything to do with some desire that you have, but it's an impression that can lead you to some kind of activity. And when we release stress during the TM practice, then those kinds of impressions deep within the nervous system, deep within the brain, they begin to become dissolved. And then the seed for future desires are eliminated. That's one way desires are eliminated. The other side of it on the mental level is that we begin to experience more fulfillment, more happiness, more bliss. And that weakens the need, to look for fulfillment in the environment. There's nothing wrong with fulfilling desires. If you have a desire to, to visit the Grand Canyon or something, why not? Life is here to enjoy. There's nothing wrong with it. But if it's based upon some deep stress, some deep impression, then our regular practice will dissolve it so that, for one thing, we're not attached to it and we're not overshadowed by it when we have the experience. You can still go to the Grand Canyon after the seed of the desire is dissolved, but you'll enjoy it in a very easy, happy, fun way. So all of these different things are, again, I think you can go through the Gita and time after time there are examples of how the path and the goal have been confused.
Let me spend one more minute on desires, then we'll leave that and go beyond it, because it is such an important theme of Chapter 2. And in Chapter 2, verse 67, it says, "When a man's mind is governed by any of the wandering senses, his intellect is carried away by it as a ship by the wind on water. Therefore, he whose senses are all withdrawn from their objects, O mighty armed, his intellect is established." So our minds, through the senses are drawn to different objects and different desires because we believe that those objects and the fulfillment of those desires will bring us happiness. So, as Krishna said, our minds get carried away like a ship by the wind, but they never do fulfill us. They never do bring us happiness, at least not in any lasting sense. Yet we never seem to learn, and we continue to seek fulfillment in fulfillment of desires and in the objects of the senses. So people speak about controlling the senses, but that's not really what's stated here. It's Krishna, he doesn't say anything about controlling the senses. He says whose senses are withdrawn from their objects. So perhaps you could explain to us what is the difference here between controlling senses and withdrawing them from their objects?
Well, I mean, one way that you withdraw from the senses and their objects is when you transcend, when you experience the inner self. That is, it's interesting, this is sort of a sidelight, but there are many Sanskrit expressions for withdrawing, and they refer to withdrawing from the world in the sense that you sit, close the eyes, take the awareness inward, and you go to that transcendental state that is beyond the material world, and that is a kind of withdrawing. Interpretations of these range from, creating a mood, as we've seen, or even to the understanding that you have to be a recluse, that you have to go to a cave, you have to withdraw yourself from the world in order to experience the inner self, in order to gain enlightenment. But if someone's called to a reclusive state of life, that's great. There's nothing wrong with it for those who, for whom that's their natural inclination. But it's not a technique for transcending. It's not a technique for going into the inner self. Even a recluse ideally will sit in his or her cave and practice a technique for withdrawing from the world directly. So that's one element of it. And then, as you said, there's really never any satisfaction that comes from the outside world. But it's important to realize, because even for those who practice, Maharishi's TM, who withdraw from the world every day, and they notice, you become more aware of the fact that, maybe I shouldn't be drawn to this particular desire, ice cream's not really good for me, or pizza's not really good for me, or whatever. And you may feel like, I really need to stop these desires. And it's fine. One guidance Maharishi gave was, he said, just don't do anything you know to be wrong. But he never advocated turning your life into a great effort to, withdraw from desires, to remove desires, to make an attitude of happiness, any of those things. He just felt that the fundamental instruction in life is transcend, experience a state of yoga, and then over time experience the growth of yoga in your life to higher states. So it's a very, very important understanding. And also, and this is a very critical and important point, when one practices TM, what one finds is a spontaneous growth of being drawn towards that which is good for one's growth and evolution, and spontaneously, withdrawing from things that aren't useful. Many people say, even after a very short time of practicing TM, they start to be conscious of the food they eat. What food's agreeable to me? What's good and helpful to me? What's not so agreeable to me? And maybe different things for different people. It certainly is different things for different people. But it comes naturally and spontaneously and automatically. And then you may find that, I'm engaged in things that really aren't that useful to my growth and evolution. I don't know. I can't think of an example, but you'll find, and people do find, that they just stop doing things that aren't good. A great example of this is, we've taught a number of times over the years transcendental meditation to prisoners and in prisons, people who've committed very serious crimes, who have had very strong desires in the wrong direction. And we teach TM. And one of the things I've found is that they don't come back to prison nearly as often as the prisoners who don't practice TM, who go out and then continue to commit crimes. Now, in these programs, we never say you shouldn't commit crimes. It's better not to steal, don't do this, don't do that. We never teach that. All we teach is how to practice TM, how to transcend. And then over time, what we find is that people that are on the far extreme of, maybe acting against natural law, you could say, find themselves just gravitating towards, building a good life, getting a good job, having a family, as opposed to trying to make their way through life through, nefarious activities.
You and I both share a background in transcendental meditation and TM. And I think it's also important for us to highlight that the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita are universal, and that the evolution of human consciousness is a natural phenomenon that takes place. There are various techniques. TM we know to be tremendously effective and most beneficial, very well researched, very well documented, and certainly is at the core of the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. But there is a universality that really encompasses all spiritual life and spiritual teachings, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. There's something very interesting that Maharishi, he once gave a lecture on the 4 fundamental types of yoga practice. Traditionally, there are 4 fundamental types. In the world today, you find many types, but there are 4 fundamental types. And he analyzed each, and he said that they were good, but they had lost an essential aspect of the knowledge, and that was the ability to transcend. And what he said in that particular lecture was, a technique of yoga practice should give you the experience of samadhi, of the inner state of yoga, within the first couple of days of practice. Most yoga practices, they long for the experience of samadhi. They hope they can have it in, at some future point before they pass along. And the thought of full enlightenment is kind of a distant dream. And Maharishi's point was, they shouldn't feel that the experience of the inner self is the end goal of yoga practice. It's the beginning in the first days. The experience of samadhi in the early days, it may not be infinite, unbounded, eternal consciousness. It may be just a quick glimpse. It may be just a moment of silence. It can be anything like that. But over time, the experience becomes deeper and more prolonged. And what he said about all these different practices of yoga, he said they're good, they're traditional, they're useful. All they need to do is reestablish the ability to transcend, experience samadhi right away, and then all of the other aspects of the practices, like what are the different, I can't remember, mantra yoga and hatha yoga and laya yoga and raja yoga. Those were the 4 that he talked about. And originally, when these practices came about, they included the ability to transcend. It's been lost for many centuries. And then if you have a teacher that you like, continue with your teacher. If you have a tradition, continue with your tradition, doing, just as you like, but just add this one little thing, experience the state of yoga within. And then that re-enlivens the practice.
Because it's the experience of one's own self. TM
Right.
is the means to achieve it. It's a means to achieve it. Once you add that to any other practice, that practice would be more fulfilling. But any practice needs to have at its foundation the experience of samadhi, as you said, the experience of one's own self, so that can become ingrained and can become a living reality spontaneously.
Exactly. Exactly.
There's a section elaborating further on desires and how it leads to anger, and how anger leads to undesirable consequences. So moving out now into that sort of social sector a little bit, Krishna says, having brought them all under control, all meaning the senses, let him sit united, looking to me as supreme. For his intellect is established and whose senses are subdued. Pondering on objects of the senses, a man develops attachment for them. And from attachment springs up desire, and desire gives rise to anger. So interesting the way he connects attachment, desire, and anger. And then he goes on to say, from anger arises delusion. From delusion, unsteadiness of memory. From unsteadiness of memory, destruction of intellect. And through the destruction of the intellect, he perishes. So, but he who is self-disciplined, who moves among the objects of the senses, with the senses freed from attachment and aversion, and under his own control, he attains to grace. So it ends with some hope. But what exactly is meant here by the term self-disciplined, and what does he mean by grace?
There's actually a bunch of things in this verse. I can't remember them all just having listened to it, but there are a bunch of things in this verse that appear to be pointing to some practice or attitude or mood, but which aren't. Now, one of them is control. What is the, I can't remember exactly which term is used in this verse. I don't have it in front of me. But in many throughout the Gita, there's a Sanskrit word niyata, and it's derived from the Sanskrit root yam, Y-A-M. And yam refers to, or yama refers to the administrator, the administering intelligence that governs and organizes creation. It's that intelligence of the inner state of yoga and the state of yoga underlying creation. So that value of administration, when you experience the inner state and then you start to bring it out into activity, what you bring with you, one thing that you bring with you, is the quality and characteristic of the administrator, that administering intelligence that organizes everything to be in accord with natural law. So what does that mean in terms of the senses? The expression was control of the senses. But looking to the root of that, and Maharishi may bring that out in the commentary, I can't remember, but looking to the root of that word indicates that in the Sanskrit, the original sense of it was, before it got in the hands of different translators, was that by transcending, by experiencing that administrative intelligence, and then by bringing that into one's life, then the senses become more under control in the sense that they begin to act more in accord with the laws of nature. Prior to the experience of the inner self, the inner state of yoga, one's senses might be going all over the place. You can see it in oneself, you can see it in others, that there are desires going here, desires going there, the senses go here, that you want to taste this, want to see this, all of these different things. And they're not necessarily desiring or wanting to go in a direction that is uplifting, that is life-supporting, that is in terms of the growth of evolution. But when they become, quote unquote, under control, what it means is that they begin to function in a way that naturally and spontaneously, can't say those two words enough, naturally and spontaneously begins to lead one in the direction of nature's own functioning, and leads one towards the experience that our own physiologies were intended to have. Our physiologies are capable of experiencing infinity, but because of stress, because of imbalance, we don't. But releasing stress, purifying, and all of that spontaneously again leads us in that direction. But the path becomes quicker as we go along, because all of a sudden, or gradually, I guess I should say, things like the senses begin to be a help to life instead of a hindrance, automatically and spontaneously. They help our evolution. I don't like to look anymore at things that, are not evolutionary. I like to eat evolutionary food. I like to be in the company of people that think and act in accord with happiness and progress and evolution, rather than, living with people who are more intent on destruction. But it's all, again, natural and spontaneous. Was there anything else in that verse? There was quite a number of things that were kind
There
of interesting.
there was indeed. Here, having brought them all under control, let him sit united. So that's something that would lead itself to misinterpretation. When he says, having brought the senses under control, again, it would be easy for people to think that means forcibly rather than spontaneously, having some control of the senses. And then he goes on to say, pondering on the objects of senses, a man develops attachment for them. So, and from attachment springs up desire. So again, people might intellectually, making a mood of non-attachment, of control of the senses, again, confusing the reality of the goal with the path.
Yeah, exactly that. There's nothing more to add. I think you said it perfectly. The verse, it sounds like you should, the people who made those misinterpretations, many of them were brilliant and very good people, but they didn't have that experience of the transcendent, at least not to the extent that we expect from our practice. But you read those words and you interpret them in the traditional way. In terms of modern translators, they all use dictionaries. Dictionaries are just conventions. They're not necessarily even accurate representations of the Sanskrit expressions. And then the last section, I think, you said something about, could you read the last part of the verse?
But he who is self-disciplined, who moves among the objects of the senses with the senses freed from attachment and aversion and under his own control, he attains to grace. So the question, my original question was self-discipline. What is meant by that? Because I don't believe it means some kind of discipline the way we think about it as a practice. It means a spontaneously self-discipline, and also what is meant by grace.
Grace is just the growth of consciousness. It's the growth of the infinite divine level of consciousness that we initially experience deep within, that starts to come out. And that is, I think the term grace beautifully describes the feeling that one has and the experience that one has as consciousness grows within and without. And it is the experience of that divine level of consciousness. It's beautiful. Was there something, or maybe it was in the previous verse, about looking to me or pondering on me? Or
Yes. I think what you might be asking about is, Krishna says, having brought them all under control, the senses, let him sit united, looking to me as supreme, for his intellect is established, whose senses are subdued.
Yeah. So in the interpretations, not all, but many interpretations in the past, people have thought about Lord Krishna when he says, look to me in a certain way, or united with me, as they're looking to him as an individual human being. But when he is speaking in these terms, he's describing his status as being the embodiment of natural law, the embodiment of the absolute, the embodiment of the supreme intelligence. So
Our
when he
own
says,
self.
yeah, our own self, exactly. And so when he says, look to me or look upon me in a certain way, he's not suggesting that we worship the historical form of Krishna. He's saying that we should transcend and then we should experience that inner reality ultimately in the entire objective world. We mentioned cosmic consciousness earlier. There's a state called unity consciousness in which one begins to experience the world outside of oneself in terms of that same value of absolute consciousness. So first we develop it on the level of ourself, and then we progress so that we can experience everything. I look at some flowers or a mountain or the Grand Canyon or the Swiss Alps, and I see the full range of their existence, not only the surface level, but I see that absolute value of pure intelligence that underlies and creates and permeates the Alps or the flower. And that is the ultimate value of life. And when Lord Krishna says, look to me, having control of the senses, he's describing that state of life that is the ultimate reality of life, where one sees both oneself and the objective world completely in terms of the absolute field of being, the state of yoga. That's the supreme experience of yoga.
I'm very glad you said that, Phil, because it reminds me that there are many people who would look to Bhagavad Gita and think, oh, this is a religious text of Hinduism, and it belongs to Hinduism, and it's not my religion, so I'm not interested. It has nothing to do with me. I don't want to go against my religion. But that's not the case. It's a universal teaching, is it not? And if so, if I'm correct, I wonder if you could explain that a little better than I can.
Well, a couple of things we could say about that. All of the principles that Maharishi is deriving from Bhagavad Gita, and which are inherently contained within Bhagavad Gita, are the principles of life. They're the principles of nature's functioning. They're the principles of how we grow and evolve to the highest states of consciousness. And that doesn't mean that you have to be a certain religion or a certain culture or from a geographical area of the world. These principles are found in all of the major religions. I have a very close friend who is a faculty member at Maharishi International University, and his speciality is going into the texts of different religions and locating these principles. I mean, one very obvious one that we think often is in the Christian Bible. It talks about the kingdom of the Lord is within. Seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and then all else will fall into you. That is almost exactly what we described in terms of verse 2, verse 45 of the Bhagavad Gita. The kingdom of the Lord, or the kingdom of heaven, is within you.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to say, I mean, when we talk about the Lord, it's a name that we apply to that universal level of consciousness that governs all the laws of nature. How you envision that and in what form, if any form at all, is really irrelevant in terms of what the central teaching is. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's just in the Bible, it has a certain reference, and so it describes it that way.
But different scriptures would give different references and call that level of supreme consciousness by different names, right?
Yeah, exactly. But ultimately, at their core, every religion teaches these fundamental truths. And throughout the history of mankind, there are many examples of when this knowledge, the knowledge of transcending, was brought to light and then over time got lost and brought to light. You can think of Buddha as an individual who brought the same knowledge out. The great Shankara, who also brought the same knowledge of life, but they brought it out in the language of their time. They brought it out in the vocabulary and and in the philosophy of the time, and in different times in different ways, according to what was needed at that particular time. But it's the same knowledge that comes out over and over, throughout world history. Um, there are many people who have spontaneous experiences of higher states of consciousness. There is a wonderful book written by a professor at MIU talking about it. But when you look to the writings of those people, often what you found is that they had an experience of higher states of consciousness and then never knew how to get it back and mourned for it, literally mourned for it. Like it was like they had the experience of the ultimate reality of life, a beautiful, blissful, peaceful, experience, but didn't know how to ever get it back. They had a nervous system that was refined enough to have the experience. Not everybody can do that. Um, anyway, this one faculty member compiled many of them through every culture and so forth. And the experience is the same. It's just represented by the individuals, whether sometimes they were religious leaders, sometimes they were a playwright, sometimes there were, all kinds of different people who had these cosmic experiences of higher states of consciousness.
For those people that are interested in that subject, you may want to listen to the podcast episode with Dr. Craig Pearson, in which he goes through those experiences from his book, The Supreme Awakening. Now, we've talked about specific verses and the teaching of Krishna with regards to what it really means to be free from the influence of desires, what it means to have steady intellect. The story depicts this battle and the details of the battle between these two armies in Kurukshetra, but really, the essence of the Bhagavad Gita is the enlightenment of Arjuna, of Krishna bestowing upon Arjuna the knowledge that enlightens him, that brings him to self-realization, that brings him to the full knowledge of his own nature, his own self. And I wonder if we've been digging deep. I wonder if just now you could just give us a brief 30,000-foot view of the remainder of the Gita, of how it unfolds from beginning this conversation and the teachings that Krishna gives to Arjuna, and how that ultimately results in the enlightenment and liberation of Arjuna. In other words, the relevance of Gita for people who are spiritual seekers, who want to develop the full knowledge of their own being.
Yeah. The relevance is in gaining a deep and profound intellectual understanding, which should be accompanied by deep and profound experience. When Maharishi talks about the growth to higher states of consciousness, he always says the experience, of course, the experience is first, being able to go deep within, experience the inner self. That's the most important. But accompanying that should be the knowledge, the intellectual understanding, for a number of different reasons. One obvious reason is that it inspires one to continue and to aspire to higher states of consciousness. When you read the experiences of the highest states of consciousness that are described in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita and elsewhere, you read those, then it'll get you through rough times, and it'll keep you on the program of regular meditation. We always emphasize regularity because twice a day you just get there faster. And
sorry to interrupt, but just from what you just said, I just wanted to add, there is a verse in the Gita where Krishna says, even a little of this Dharma delivers one from great fear.
Yeah. And so the knowledge, one example that you probably have all experienced something like this, that Maharishi likes to use, he said you could eat a piece of fruit and you could think, this is delicious, but what is it? And that's the experience. And then when someone says, oh, that's a mango, It absolutely enriches the experience. Having the knowledge, having the understanding enriches and how should we say, it just enriches the experience and makes it more profound when you understand what it is you're experiencing. I'll tell you a story if you don't mind. When I was first learned Transcendental meditation, I tell this story to every time I teach people to practice TM. I was in college in Washington, D.C., and I was walking home from school, and life was just fantastic. Everything was going wonderfully. I mean, I started to pay attention in classes for the first time. I was happy, relationships were good, and I was walking home musing on this fact. And then I had the thought, if only that meditation would start to work, then life would be really good. But it was the meditation that was creating all that. But I didn't have that intellectual understanding. And a friend of mine explained to me, no, that's the result of your meditation. It made the whole experience much more real, much more profound. It wasn't a question of just kind of making a mode about it. It really enriched the experience of itself. And as you grow towards higher states of consciousness, knowledge is such a delightful facet of the whole program because you experience it. And what is it that you're experiencing when you gain knowledge? You're experiencing yourself. You're experiencing descriptions of your own self and how your own self is growing and evolving towards consciousness. And let's face it, there's nothing more fun than learning more about yourself, especially when it has such infinite dimensions. So that's a very, very important element of Bhagavad Gita.
So the knowledge and the experience are mutually complementary and mutually supportive of each other. One leads to greater understanding of the next step.
Yeah.
You've taught many classes on this. You've had many students. What advice do you give on how to integrate or apply the knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita to their lives? Because it's not just a philosophy, it's not just a fanciful knowledge, it has practical applications that are significant. How does one apply those or bring those values into one's life?
It's a good question. I mean, in my experience, they come all by themselves. And reading the knowledge, reading the descriptions of higher states, reading all of the different things, they're very joyful in the context of growing experience. And, it's a little bit like if you're sitting in a bathtub and you sit still for a long time, you don't feel anything. There's just water, you're wet. But if you move around a little bit, and then all of a sudden that warmth comes back, the waves kind of wash across your legs or something, and you feel, oh, this is warm, this is comfortable, this is nice. For me, and it may be different for other people, but I find the discussions in the Bhagavad Gita to be thrilling in just that way. It's kind of like we all feel a different level of happiness and bliss, and it's always growing in life. But the knowledge, it kind of washes across across your thinking and across your being and across your feeling, and it enriches your life. It's very experiential in its own right. Even though it's intellectual, it's experiential as well. So that's for me. For others, it may be, that you derive, reading through, different people resonate with different things. I find this in classes where there might be 20 or sometimes up to 100 people studying. Actually, we had 200 in the Bhagavad Gita class recently. And everybody seemed to, zoom in on a different concept or different idea, something that all of a sudden said, oh, I get that. That's just like this in my life. And that's something I need to think about. And I mean, we don't want to adopt, the wrong things, like trying to make a mood of this and trying to say that I'm unbounded or I'm happy. But in terms of behavioral things, people pick up different things, and then they read the Bhagavad Gita again, a year or two later, and they pick up different things. I knew a woman once who started reading the Bhagavad Gita when it was published in 1967. And I met her in the 90s or maybe in the early aughts. And since 1967, every night she read the Bhagavad Gita for 15 minutes or something like that. And she had been through it and through it and through it, probably more than anybody in the history of the world, just reading through the Gita and the commentary. And her one comment was, and it's new every time. Every time I go through it, I see things I never saw before, because consciousness is growing. And as consciousness grows, one penetrates more into the knowledge very spontaneously. You see things. Every time I teach a class, every time I listen to a tape of Maharishi, there are things that pop out that I never understood before.
And aside from the deeper core teaching of Arjuna's realization, his moksha, it begins with this moral dilemma, which you were explaining, that Arjuna sees his maternal uncles, grandfathers, nephews, cousins on the other side. He sees no value in creating death and in killing. And what about on that level alone? Do you see an application of Bhagavad Gita to the modern conflicts that we experience today?
Yes. This is an interesting one. I think I might mention it briefly. The first word of the Bhagavad Gita is Dharma. It's actually Dharma Kshetra, which means on the field of Dharma. And this is a very, very important understanding from Bhagavad Gita. Dharma is traditionally, when I say traditionally, I mean the way it's kind of been for the last few hundreds and thousands of years, is it's thought of as a collection of rules and regulations. You should do this, you should do that, you should live this way, you should live that way, that have been passed down for hundreds and thousands of years. And, it's really kind of tedious in that context. But Maharishi added some very, very profound understandings of what Dharma is. And he starts his commentary in the Bhagavad Gita by explaining it as the invincible power of evolution, not just an evolution of us as individuals, but of the entire cosmos, from the beginning of creation to on and on and on to wherever it goes. It's all in the evolutionary direction. And the force of nature that guides that is called Dharma. And it's derived from the Sanskrit word Dhr, spelled D-H-R approximately, and it means to hold. And it means that which holds on to evolution. So that has an application. There's rules, not rules so much, but it can be applied to individual life, first of all. We all have individual dharmas. We all have things that we need to do in life in order to evolve, to grow. Different people, sometimes people have, right from the beginning of their lives, they think, I have to do this. This is what I need to do with my life. And they do it their entire life. Maybe it's a pianist, maybe it's something else. I have twin nephews who grew up, and from the age of about 2, all they wanted to do was play soccer. That's all they wanted. And then they're now both professional soccer players, one in Germany, one in the US. And that was their dharma. For whatever reason, that was what was best for them in life. Other people are teachers. Other people are architects, or they work construction, or they like to build houses, or they like to be lawyers. There are many, many different kinds of things, but those aren't arbitrary because they are structured by laws of nature that are guiding evolution. And when you have a dharma, let's say to be an architect, and when you follow that dharma, your evolution will be quicker and smoother and easier. And sometimes people will say, I don't know what my dharma is. I'm 21 years old and I have no idea what I want to do in life. And they say, what do you suggest I do? And the recommendation is that one learn to transcend, go within. And the reason that's such a good recommendation with respect to Dharma is that the laws of nature that guide your life, that are unique to your life, are structured, come from that field of consciousness. And when that becomes more lively, then your own Dharma will tend to awaken. And where does it come from? Really, your intuition. People start having a feeling, I really want to do this. Why do they want to do that? Because the laws of nature that are guiding their life are suggesting it, I guess you could say. Um, and there's one very important verse in the Bhagavad Gita where it says, the literal translation is, better death in your own Dharma than living the Dharma of another. And the reason that's so important is what it's saying essentially is, live your own Dharma. Don't look to others. As Maharishi would often say, don't look to the left or the right. Live your life, your unique life. If you look at somebody else, and their life looks really cool, and you think, boy, they're a lawyer, maybe I should do that. If it's not your Dharma, it won't be useful. It won't be productive to your evolution. There are different Dharmas at different levels of evolution. Yours is yours and mine is mine, and they're appropriate for our level of evolution, but it's not useful for to look to somebody else and think, I think I'll do that. That looks like fun. Try it out. Um, Dharma is all about evolution. And that is why in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna was explaining his dilemma, should I fight? Should I not fight? Should I do this? If I fight, I'll go to heaven. If I don't fight, my reputation will be blasted. And Lord Krishna basically startled him. He gave him an expression kind of reminding him of his mother. And he said, whence comes this paltry faint-heartedness? And it kind of shocked Arjuna. And then that shock provided the platform to Lord Krishna to tell him what he should do. And what he told him to do was, in Arjuna's case, he said, fight in the battle, because it's your Dharma. You're from that part of society that protects society, and that's what you have to do, because only doing your own Dharma are you guaranteed that you will not incur sin. That's basically what he said. And sin means going off the path of evolution, violating natural law, that kind of thing. One of the central themes of the Gita is, do your Dharma. Do what you were born to do. That may change during your life. It happens. You may be an architect and you decide you need to be a lawyer. It's just because that's the need of evolution for you at that time. But if you're knowledgeable about what you feel, I was born to be a musician, I was born to be a lawyer, I was born to be a truck driver, it doesn't matter what it is, then go with that. And that's your best course of action in life. It's not as useful to try to weigh, what will I get from this? And if I do this, what will I get? What's the plus? What's the minus? Just do what you were born to do. Do what is right. And that will provide the best foundation for evolution.
That's a great point. And I think in Arjuna's case, that's very clear because he is a warrior and he's on the battlefield. So Krishna can say, do your Dharma, do your duty. And for many people, yes, at a young age, they know they want to be a musician. They know they want to be a soccer player. They know they want to be a doctor. They know they want to be a veterinarian or whatever it may be. But many people, as you said, they may be 20, 25, 30. They have no specific pull in any direction. How do those people then attune themselves to what is best and what is in Dharma? And just to clarify, I think when you say follow your Dharma, you mean do what is most evolutionary. Do what promotes your growth and evolution. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And that can be on the level of your profession or the way you live life. I had a student today, it was very interesting. We were talking about Dharma in class, and she was saying, I don't really know what my Dharma, I'm 40-some years old. And I said, well, what do you like to do? And she said, I really like to learn. And she said, can it be my Dharma just to go through life learning and learning and learning? Yeah, it's what she likes to do. It's what's most evolutionary for her. She's happy because she felt a little lost. But when she understood that, yeah, it's a perfectly acceptable thing to do. It's what she's called to do. And so she, takes programs and studies this and reads these books. It's a great thing.
So Dharma might be as subtle as opposed to a passion for playing soccer or hockey or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
It may be as subtle as I'd like to do this, right? Just going by
Yeah,
one's feeling. Is that what you mean?
exactly right. It doesn't have to be
Okay.
so overwhelming as you learning to be a concert pianist at the age of 4. It
Right.
doesn't have to be like that. It can, for most people, it's just a subtle feeling, like, I'd like to be a banker, I think, and that's right. That's being guided by the Dharma. And when people go and if he or she becomes a banker and they enjoy that throughout their life and throughout their career, they didn't come to it through some enormous flash of light that went through their head. It was just a quiet thought. I think I'd like to be a banker. and, and that's following the Dharma.
So as the Gita unfolds and the understanding of Arjuna grows, and as Krishna bestows greater and greater knowledge on him, we reach a point in the 18th chapter where Arjuna says, I have regained my memory.
Mm.
And can you say something about that?
Yeah,
Because it's certainly, it's the fulfillment, really, of
yeah.
the Bhagavad Gita.
Sritir labdha is the Sanskrit expression. I have regained memory. Um, the Bhagavad Gita, is there for all of us. It's eternal principles for all mankind. But when it was spoken out, it was Lord Krishna wasn't just giving out a philosophy. He was guiding Arjuna's evolution. And he was giving him the knowledge that he needed. Sometimes he gave him a shock, which was needed. He guided his evolution from the beginning through the 18th chapter. And at the end of the 18th chapter, Arjuna said those very words that Ram was just speaking. I've regained memory. Um, and what that means is that deep within all of us is that eternal field of the state of yoga. It's not just that it's deep within us, it is our essential nature. But when we take on our growth and evolution in a human body and we go through our life, um, and we are trying to restore that experience, restore the experience of our unbounded nature. So when Arjuna said, I've regained memory, it means that the veil of ignorance was lifted from him, that Lord Krishna systematically and sequentially said just the right thing at every step on his growth and evolution. And in the 18th chapter, the job was done. And Arjuna was fully enlightened. And from then he went on to fight in the battle. And that was it. But the beauty of the Bhagavad Gita is that it was spoken to Arjuna for the sake of his individual enlightenment, but it has lasted eternally so that it's there for all of us to gain knowledge. And gaining knowledge also, I didn't mention this part of it, it has an effect of purifying the nervous system. When you read this knowledge, especially this kind of evolutionary knowledge, when you read through the Bhagavad Gita, you read the verses, you read the commentary, it purifies the nervous systems. There's stress and imbalance that begins to be corrected. It would probably be measurable. We should suggest to our brain scientists that there are brainwave changes that take place when you're reading this kind of text, text of enlightenment, because it's enlivening those deep qualities of intelligence that lie within us, that are latent within us, and that when we put our attention on it, when we experience it, when we read it, when we hear it, then those become lively, and they become lively in our own awareness. So there's a huge value to reaching it, and that value is all in the direction of regaining our memory.
That's a beautiful point. Very nicely expressed, Bill. But if someone wanted to read the Gita, study Bhagavad Gita, what advice would you give them in terms of how best to approach the subject?
I would first suggest learning Transcendental meditation for those who don't, because without the experience of transcending, it wouldn't be so meaningful. But when you're experiencing the self within, and when it's becoming more lively, not through any effort, but in a most spontaneous way, you begin to resonate with the descriptions of the self and evolution. If you can take a Gita study course, that's wonderful, because then you have the opportunity to go through it slowly and carefully with some experienced teachers. I think we had over 400 people in some of the chapters.
For those who may not have access to the course, any advice you would give someone who's reading it on their own at home, alone, besides learning meditation beforehand?
I'd buy Maharishi's commentary. You can get that through miupress.org, which is the press at Maharishi International University. Maharishi's comment, it has a great index in the back for one thing, but the commentary is very, very different from the commentary of, say, the other 1,000 or so commentaries that one could read that are available today. And the commentary is in terms of the understanding that yoga means a practice, and it also means a state of yoga. And when to apply which meaning is something that takes a lot of skill. And Maharishi's done that for us throughout the verses and explained where yoga in this context is referring to a description of the state of yoga. In this context, it's referring to a practice. And then the whole thing makes more sense.
It would also be available in bookstores as well.
Amazon.
I believe so.
Amazon.
Yeah, or Amazon.
As Kindle or as a hard copy. And you could download it right away as a Kindle if you like reading books on the computer. That's a great way to do it.
One last question. The Bhagavad Gita takes place on the field of Kurukshetra. All the armies of the world, it is said, are involved. They're on one side or the other. One side, the righteous, upholding Dharma and good moral values. The other side representing evil. And in the midst of that, Krishna gives Arjuna the knowledge of enlightenment, liberation, moksha. Now, some people say it's mythology, it's allegory, it's a nice story with a beautiful meaning underlying it. Others will say it actually happened. And others will say both. It really happened, but it's also a metaphor for the battle that goes on within consciousness. Let me ask you, Dr. Sen, what is it? Did it happen? Is it mythology, or did it really happen, or is it just allegory?
Well, I think your answer of both is probably the best. People have asked Maharishi, is it historical or is it just mythological? And he said, no, it's an historical truth. But the principles within it are eternal principles. And, the battlefield of Kurukshetra is the battlefield of life. We all have the battlefield sometimes. We all go through things. Sometimes we don't know what to do. We're just as bewildered as Arjuna was bewildered. And this is the knowledge for the battlefields that we all go through in life. So yeah, I think both sounds best to me.
Unfortunately, the battle ends with victory for the righteous and with the enlightenment of Arjuna. And I think that will be a good place for us to bring this discussion to a close. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Sands.
Oh, thank you for me. It's really been fun. I enjoyed it very much.